What's up, everybody? This is Alex Christoforou with the Duran, and I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, and today we're going to be taking a look at Brexit impasse. All right, Alexander, the Brexit story doesn't look like it's ending, and you just said it moments ago as we were talking before we did this video. It's getting more complicated, it seems. I thought the vote, when they voted, was going to be a quick, a hard Brexit. The UK's out. C'est la vie. Everything's done. And that would be that. They would do whatever negotiations they had, and there would be an amicable parting of ways. But it looks like Theresa May is really got herself in a bind as she tried to push for a soft Brexit. And her negotiations are failing with the EU, and it looks like, from what I read in the latest news, that the EU is willing to pull out of the negotiations and just let a hard Brexit take its course. What's going on here, Alexander, with Theresa May, with her negotiations with the EU? Are we looking at a hard Brexit?
Well, first of all, I think you put your absolute finger on it. I think what perhaps should have happened, and the thing that was most logical after the referendum, is that there should have been a clear acceptance that Britain was leaving the EU, and there should have been a negotiation to agree transitional arrangements so as to enable British and European companies and British and European individuals to adjust to that reality over a period of time. That period of time could have been negotiated. It could have been 2 years or 4 years or 5 years or more years, but the destination, the eventual outcome should have been clear. What Theresa May instead tried to do is she tried to negotiate a settlement in which Britain would be outside the EU officially, but inside its economic structures simultaneously. In other words, half in, half out. Very much an attempt, I think, by Theresa May to please all sides in the Brexit debate. That's very much how Theresa May works. It's very much how weak leaders work. They try to appease everybody and make everybody happy. So what has gradually happened is that she's managed to make everybody unhappy. The hard Brexiters are unhappy because they're not getting the Brexit, or she's not negotiating for them the Brexit they wanted, which was the clean break Brexit. The anti-Brexiteers are unhappy because they're saying, well, hold on, what we actually want is to stay in the EU, so we don't really want any kind of agreement that is less than that. And, of course, the EU itself is becoming completely fed up with an overcomplicated situation in which the British themselves clearly don't know their own mind, haven't decided really what they want, and are seeking to have it both ways. As I said, both to be in and to be out. And what has now happened is we've had two European Council meetings, one in September in Salzburg, one just this week in Luxembourg, and you can see more and more EU leaders, including the EU Commission, are starting to say, enough is enough. Let us bring this ghastly saga to an end. And let's just say, if you can't agree, we won't agree. And Brexit will happen on the 29th of March 2019 without an agreement. That is exactly what the sort of thing you would expect if somebody tries to carry out a negotiation which tries to please everybody.
It seems to me that the EU is more eager to get rid of the UK than the UK is to leave, or at least Theresa May is to leave.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
I think that is absolutely correct. I mean, I think there is a very, very sizable group of people in Britain, and of course, the greater part of the political and establishment here, who don't want Britain to leave the EU at all. They don't want to leave Britain to leave the EU for economic reasons. But I think transcending that for many of them, there is a geopolitical thing, because they see the EU as the vehicle, or as a vehicle, through which Britain exerts political influence. It's able to lobby, for example, within the EU for more and more sanctions against Russia, which it might find very difficult to do if it's outside the EU. Of course, a lot of people in Britain want Britain to leave the EU, which is why there was a referendum and why the referendum resulted in a majority for leave. But what I think has happened is an awful lot of people within the EU itself, a lot of the EU leaders have been saying to themselves for some time, the British have never been really committed to the EU project. They've always been difficult. They've always been manipulative. They've always complained that they've been asked for money. They've always resisted any steps we want to take towards greater EU integration. Now we see this endless negotiation that we are trapped in with the British. Frankly, the British are more trouble than they're worth. Let's say goodbye and have them go once and for all. And I think that is an increasing view amongst a lot of people within the European Union, and especially, I suspect, in Germany.
Gosh, how the tables have turned. The EU now wants the UK out. It seems. So, Alexander, what are the...
Go on. I mean, this is, as I said, a direct product of Theresa May's negotiating position. She never really understood the EU and how the EU works and the mind of the EU. And she never understood something absolutely fundamental, which is that ultimately, the moment she invoked Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union, which said that Britain is going to leave the EU on the 29th of March 2019, it became the EU that decided what the terms of Brexit would be. So the British can make whatever proposal they want, but it's the EU in the end which must agree this. Now, she was told that by Jean-Claude Juncker last year. There's an article by myself on the Duran about this, which I wrote at the time, and which he found, apparently Juncker found Theresa May unable to understand this, and he reported to Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, that he found Theresa May on a different planet, and or I think it was a different galaxy, actually. And as I said, it doesn't seem to have really been understood by the British either. But as you rightly say, they managed to turn reality on its head. So whereas in 2016, the EU was horrified when Britain said it was going to leave, now more and more people in the EU are saying, well, good riddance, let them go.
Yeah, the EU is going to give the UK citizens who voted for a hard Brexit, the EU is going to end up giving it to them. Exactly. Not Theresa May.
Well, absolutely. That is, of course, the ultimate irony of all of this. I mean, there is now a coalition, if you like, starting to emerge between the Brexit hardliners in Britain who want a hard Brexit and who argue, quite logically, I should say, that that is the only way you can interpret the referendum correctly. The referendum say, quite simply, do you want to stay in the EU or do you want to leave it? A majority said we want to leave it. And the hardline Brexiteers say, well, that should mean what it says. And you're getting more and more people within the EU who are saying, well, let's have no more of this unending soap opera, this ghastly unending story. If that's what the British want, let them have it. And if that's what Theresa May doesn't want, well, she hasn't come up with any coherent proposal we can work with.
So what are the key stumbling points right now for Theresa May to achieve her soft Brexit? Is it the border is it the dispute over how they're going to treat the border with Ireland? Is it economic issues?
Right, I think the border with Ireland has been given a huge and, in my opinion, exaggerated amount of attention. But again, we come back to Theresa May's absolutely wretched negotiating tactics, because what happened was that the Irish government, the government of the Republic of Ireland, which is very much a member of the EU and has every intention of staying a member of the EU, complained last year that if Britain left the EU, there would be a hard border between Northern Ireland, where a lot of Irish Catholics who want to join the South live, and Southern Ireland. And they complained about it. And the EU took up that complaint, and Theresa May, very foolishly and without proper consultation, said, don't worry, we're not going to have a hard border. In other words, it'll be frictionless as it is now. Now, she appears to have said that on the assumption that she was going to get a soft Brexit. And of course, what she's discovered is that for multiple other reasons, of which the most important is that the kind of soft Brexit that she wants is unacceptable to most of her own Conservative Party, she's found now that this Irish border issue is suddenly becoming really complicated. But the real sticking point, the real problem, is not economic, in my opinion. It's not the border. It's defining what Brexit means. People in Britain who voted for Brexit and the hardliners in the Conservative Party say that Brexit should mean what it says. It should mean leaving the EU entirely. It should mean leaving the customs union, leaving the European single market, having nothing more to do with the European Court of Justice. And if that is the position that a majority of people within the Conservative Party take, it's very difficult to see how Theresa May can square the circle and deliver a soft Brexit that will be acceptable to the Europeans or anyone else.
All right, so we're fast approaching the deadline. If Brexit fails, is Theresa May finally gone?
Well, not for the first time. I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a broken record here, Alex, but not for the first time. The British newspapers are full of stories about Theresa May not surviving another week, and perhaps there might be a leadership challenge in a few days or a few weeks, or perhaps this weekend or wherever. I mean, I've believed some of these rumours before, and they didn't crystallise. And I'm afraid I'm now becoming sceptical, because it's quite clear that there's no one within the Conservative Party willing to take a place and able to move this thing forward. Something, by the way, which I find profoundly shocking and a terrible comment on the political reality in Britain today. But it seems that we are stuck with Theresa May at the moment, even as her entire negotiating strategy has been exposed as a total sham and has failed utterly. But I cannot believe that if we end up with a no-deal Brexit on the 29th of March, or even before, that she can continue as Prime Minister for much longer. I'm sure at that point, with Brexit out of the way, the knives will come out and she will be gone.
Would Theresa May even be capable of handling a hard Brexit for the UK? I imagine it's going to be an extremely complicated way forward.
No, she hasn't. She won't. She wouldn't be. And can I make a further point, which is, for me, the really serious point? I said right at the beginning that what should have happened is that we should have set a clear target and explained to the EU that, Brexit is going to happen and it's going to be a hard Brexit in effect, but that we lead a period of time of however many years it takes to sort out the many problems out. That hasn't happened. There's been no real attempt to sort out any of the problems that come with a hard Brexit. There's no real arrangements at the ports. There's no discussions with the business community. There's no review of economic policy. Britain is going into this with absolutely no preparation for it whatsoever. And who, again, is the person responsible? One has to look to the Prime Minister, Theresa May, who never believed that she would ever find herself in this position. It reminds me, if I have to touch on something familiar to us both, with Alexis Tsipras, who was making all sorts of threats about, if you remember, back in 2015, about austerity and the euro, but had made no preparations whatsoever if what he wanted didn't happen. And the result was that Greece got stuck. Britain is going in exactly the same way.
Do you think the EU is prepared for the UK to leave?
Right.
I mean, have they crossed their I's and dotted their, they crossed their T's and dotted their I's?
Right. To answer your question, no, I don't think they have, actually, because I don't think they ever quite expected that they would get into this situation. But one has to understand something, which is that the EU is a much bigger economy than Britain. And there's been this myth in Britain that the German car industry was going to rise up in anger and force the German government to agree to whatever soft Brexit Theresa May wanted in order to protect German car exports to Britain. The reality is the Germans could sell their cars to many countries, and they can even go on selling their cars to Britain after Brexit happens. It's not going to be a disaster for them. It could be a disaster for Britain.
All right. Alex, Mercouris, I wonder if this is not the last of this story that we're going to do. I'm sure. I'm afraid, Alex, it's the never-ending story. I mean, as I say, every week, I say to myself, this can't possibly get more complicated. It can't possibly get worse. Theresa May can't possibly continue. And shock, horror, it just goes on. And it goes on and on and on. I think we will eventually get some kind of clarity, probably by around the new year. But I mean, we've got all this awful weeks between then and now to see what happens. And frankly, I mean, I don't see any good outcome to this. A terrible shame, because as I said, if you go back, if you dial all the way back to the actual referendum, it was quite clear to me then, and it is quite clear to me now, what needed to be done. And as I said, British political leaders and the British establishment have failed their country utterly. Yeah, it's just a failed leadership on the part of Theresa May, and she's letting the other side dictate all the terms.
Exactly.
I mean, catastrophic.
That never needed to happen. I mean, that absolutely never needed to happen. She gave the negotiation away, and as I said, people are now starting to understand that, and they're becoming very angry. But it's very late in the day for them to be angry. They should have realised this 2 years ago. And even now, they don't seem to know what to do about it, which is why she's still there.
Yeah, and it seems that the EU is trying to get the UK out now so they can deal with the members that they're trying to keep in. Well, the Italy's, the Hungary's, and this seems to be a much more pressing problem right now that's developing than, dealing with Brexit and Theresa May's, ridiculous negotiating tactics.
You put your finger on it, because to be absolutely clear, when Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron get together, they're not talking about Brexit and Theresa May and what the British are doing. As I said, they're utterly bored with this. After the Luxembourg summit that happened the other day, it was really quite telling. They went off, Macron and Merkel, and they wined and dined each other at an expensive restaurant in Luxembourg. They didn't talk to each other about Brexit. In fact, they specifically said, apparently, that they wouldn't talk about Brexit. What keeps Macron and Merkel awake at night is not Theresa May and her absurd antics. It is what Viktor Orban in Hungary is doing and saying, what Sebastian Kurz in Austria is doing and saying, what Jerzy Kaczynski in Poland is doing and saying, and above all, looming over everything, Salvini in Italy, with his massive dispute now about the Italian budget, because it is these people taken together who are challenging the entire direction of the EU. That is where the real challenge is coming from, not from the British.
Well said. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on the notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And visit the Duran shop. Buy a t-shirt, help support the Duran. And also in the description box down below, you will find links to our PayPal and Patreon pages. Please donate to us. We really, really need your help and we really appreciate it. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you once again for discussing the never-ending Brexit story. Until next time, take care.